James Bond is at it again in the 1967 spy film You Only Live Twice. Sean Connery is once again in the lead role as James Bond. In the movie, James Bond is dispatched to Japan after an American and Soviet crewed spacecraft disappear mysteriously while in orbit. Each nation is blaming the other amidst what is going on at the time, being the Cold War. Bond secretly travels to a remote Japanese island to find the perpetrators. There he comes face to face with the head of Spectre. Spectre is working for the government of an unnamed Asian power, implied to be the People's Republic of China. And this is done to provoke war between the two superpowers. Now, there's some really interesting things that happened during the filming of this project and also around its production. While they were scouting locations in Japan, the chief production team narrowly escaped death there. On March 5, 1966, the producers, Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, and also the director Louis Gilbert and the cinematographer Freddie Young, along with production designer Ken Adam, were all booked to leave Japan on Flight 911, departing Tokyo for Hong Kong and then on to London. 2 hours before their Boeing 707 flight departed, the team was invited to an unexpected ninja demonstration, and so they ended up missing their flight. Their flight went ahead and took off as scheduled, and 25 minutes into it, the plane disintegrated over Mount Fuji, killing everybody aboard. As this was anticipated to be Sean Connery's last appearance as James Bond, publicity material released in advance announced that Bond would be killed, married, or become Japanese. While these events were actually portrayed in this movie, they were just ruses as part of Bond's undercover activities. Out of the simple courtesy on Bond's part, this is the only movie in which he accepts a martini that is stirred, not shaken. This is an intentional joke by the producers, not a mistake that they made in the script. The rocket pistol and the cigarette rocket were real-life weapons that were featured after the manufacturer paid for the product placement in the movie. It was hoped that doing this would help them become standard military intelligence equipment. However, they proved way too expensive, too clumsy, and too unreliable for this to be a possibility, and they ceased production of them in 1969. This film is the last Bond movie to make extensive use of voice dubbing. In this movie and most of the previous other Bond films, leading ladies and villains were dubbed by other actors and actresses. This practice rarely occurred in the future Bond films. Nancy Sinatra was the first non-British singer to perform a theme song for a James Bond movie. It was revealed that she was so nervous about doing this that it took her 25 different takes to record it. And the final song in the film was made up of the best parts of each recording. The novel was the last Ian Fleming James Bond novel published during his lifetime. It was released in March of 1964 and was the 12th novel in the series. For the very first time in the James Bond film franchise, the screen story bore very little resemblance to the source novel. Some of the characters and the Japanese settings remain intact, as do minor details in the film, but the two stories are radically different. Ken Adams' volcano set was constructed at Pinewood Studios and consisted of a movable helicopter platform, a working monorail, a launch pad, and a full-scale rocket mock-up that could simulate a liftoff. Ken Adams once joked that he had used more steel to make this set than the London Hilton Hotel had used in their construction. The construction of the set cost just over $1 million, and it was visible from almost 3 miles away. Now, if you'll notice, this is the first movie in the franchise where James Bond doesn't wear his trademark dinner jacket tuxedo. The ship from which 007 was fakely buried at sea was the Royal Navy ship HMS Tenby. That scene was filmed in the winter, which didn't go over well at all for the crew. They had to wear tropical gear for the scene, and it was shot several times. They had trouble with the body not sinking the first few times that they shot it. Now, the director, Lewis Gilbert's regular editor was Thelma Connell, and she was originally hired to edit the movie. But after her initial, almost 3-hour cut received a terrible response from the test audiences, they pulled in Peter Hunt, and he was asked to re-edit the movie. His cut proved to be a much greater success, and he was actually awarded the director's chair on the next movie as a result of this. The Little Nellie was based on a real-life Wallace autogyro. Its inventor was Wing Commander K.H. Wallace, and he's the one that flew Little Nellie in the movie. The machine was incorporated into the plot after production designer Ken Adam heard Wallace in a radio interview discussing his invention. Now, the gyrocopter that they show being assembled is not the one that they show flying. The kit machine was just a mock-up made strictly for the assembly sequence. This movie was one of the most difficult and imaginative of the films in the franchise up to that point, with its 45,000 plus miles of air travel for cast and crew, with filming in Japan, Gibraltar, Spain, and England. There was filming done at 9 different Japanese locations. Footage of the U.S. Jupiter spacecraft is actually film of the real Gemini spacecraft, which flew between 1965 and 1966. The Gemini spacecraft was used for testing such activities as EVAs and docking for the Apollo space program. Ironically, the Soviet spacecraft in this movie were called Gemini, the name of the real U.S. spacecraft, and their designs were based on inaccurate perceptions of what the Russian spacecraft really looked like, something which was not known until 1967, after the movie had already wrapped production. The title of the movie comes from a poem included in the novel. It goes, "You only live twice, once when you are born and once when you look death in the face." Much of the plot was inspired by the Cold War-related space race of the 1960s, which had captured a large part of the public's attention. Ironically, this movie was released 5 months following the Apollo 1 launch pad fire, which resulted in the deaths of 3 U.S. astronauts. And it also resulted in NASA suspending U.S. manned spaceflight for over a year, which included the time frame of this movie's theatrical showings. Now, the atmosphere on the set was supposedly really chilly. Sean Connery had grown really bored with the Bond role and was completely frustrated with the public fascination with the franchise. While he was in Japan, he and his wife were hounded by the international press. During news conferences, the press insisted on referring to him as James Bond. Local newsmen attempted to photograph him in the restroom. They had to bring on 30 extra private security guards to help combat the problem. It's really thought that at one time, Connery was photographed while he was on the toilet, and a picture was published in a Tokyo newspaper. Halfway through the filming, Connery announced that he would not be returning as James Bond. After the film ended up wrapping, Connery was reportedly asked whether he found Japanese women attractive, to which he allegedly replied no. and this caused many of the Japanese people to call him bad names. But in actuality, this faux pas by Sean Connery was really based on a mistranslation of what he had said. Sean Connery was just completely fed up with the role of James Bond, and this film had put the nail into the coffin. He didn't need this franchise anymore to be a success in Hollywood. You Only Live Twice premiered on June 12, 1967. It grossed $7 million from 161 theaters in the United States in its first 3 weeks on the screen, and was number one for 7 weeks. The film did about $43 million in the U.S. alone and $68 million worldwide. Take a look at this fine movie. I think it'll be 2 hours that you won't find wasted. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.